Well, the last time we got together, we talked about a subject that and two times actually, we talked about a subject that I'm really, really into and on top of, Marlon Brando. Not a subject, a man. This time we talk about something, a person that maybe history hasn't really, not I guess when you'd have to be very much into the Three Stooges, folks, the Three Stooges, to really know who I'm referring to, or who Burt Kearns, my guest, is referring to. His new book is called Just Shemp?
With an exclamation point.
Big exclamation point.
Yeah.
Okay.
With a nice subtitle, The Biography of the Three Stooges, Shemp Howard, the Face of Film Comedy.
All
For a
right.
reason. Because when you
That's
see a face like this.
Okay. And for those who can't see, we have a picture of the great Shemp right here, and what a face!
What a mug! He was voted the ugliest man in Hollywood at one point.
What? And he looks like an unsavory character. We'll get into that, and anyway, this is Burt Kearns, and the definitive book on Brando. I mean, if you check it out, it's really good stuff. And I've read them all. I think maybe I missed one, maybe here and there, but I don't think so. I think I read everything on Brando, and I picked it up. Very good. Let me ask you first, why Shemp, and why now after all these years?
Well, first of all, who can follow Marlon Brando but a face like Shemp's?
True.
Again, in following up the Brando book, we were looking to do a biography of someone different, yet someone that people have heard of and are familiar with. And it turned out that of the Three Stooges, there were actually six Stooges, because there was Moe, Larry, and Curly. And then Shemp replaced Curly in 1946. And then Shemp died. And then Joe Besser replaced Shemp. And then Joe DeRita replaced Joe Besser. So of those six, all of them had books written about them, except Shemp when we got started. So it seemed pretty interesting right there. And I began to dig into this character, into this person. Again, I'm not a great Three Stooges fan. I was a fan when I was a kid. I used to watch, when I got home from school and watched Officer Joe Bolton on WPIX. And then I'd watch the Three Stooges. My mother would come in and say, "This is too violent. You shouldn't be watching this." And then I'd hit my brother over the head with a hammer and say, this is fun. I grew out of it. A lot of people didn't. I mean, today, the Three Stooges fan community is massive. They have conventions, they have screenings, they have meetings, they have websites. So anyway, this might be the first book on one of the Three Stooges not written by someone who's part of that community. So I was able to take a different look at Shemp and the Three Stooges history than anyone has done before, I think.
No, when you told me you weren't into the Three Stooges, makes me feel a little bit better. Doesn't mean we don't have interest just because it wasn't our thing way back when. But now this man has many sides. Can you take us down the road a bit?
Yeah, I mean, Shemp is considered the fourth Stooge, but actually he's really the first. Now, the core of the Three Stooges were the Horowitz brothers, later known as the Howard brothers. There was Shemp, who was born in 1895. He was the oldest. He was the third brother, but the oldest of the ones that went into show business. Moe Howard. Moe was 2 years younger than Shemp. And then Jerome, later known as Curly, 8 years younger than Shemp. So he was the baby of the family. Now, the problem with this history of the Three Stooges, and what I came across when I started investigating it, is that out of all the entertainment groups of the 20th century, even the Beatles, anybody, few of them have a history that is so clouded with misinformation and mythology as the Three Stooges. It's all a lot of lies. And the reason is, again, most of the people who have written books about the Stooges are fans, and they all go back to the Bible for what they're writing. And the Bible is a book called I Stooged to Conquer. It was the autobiography of Moe Howard. Moe survived everyone. He survived Shemp by 20 years. And around the time he was dying in the mid-1970s, he began to write his autobiography. And he died before he finished it. His daughter finished the autobiography for him. And as it turns out, it's a very self-serving, very self-aggrandizing book in which he makes up a lot of stories, and many of them are at the expense of his older brother, Shemp. And the reason is because you go back, let's go back to the beginning with the history then. You know, they started out in Brooklyn. They were from Bath Beach, around Bensonhurst. The two of them started out in vaudeville when they were still teenagers, when they were young. They did a blackface act where they ripped off the material from a popular African American vaudeville team named Moss and Fry. They tried that out. Then around 1923, they hooked up with a guy named Ted Healy. He was a childhood friend of Moe's. Ted Healy was a famous, very successful vaudeville and Broadway singer, song and dance man, entertainer, all around MC at various shows. And they joined his team as two of his, not the only ones, but two of his, quote, stooges, although they weren't called stooges at the time. And what would happen was Ted Healy would be singing a song, doing a monologue, and he'd be interrupted by somebody from the audience or by a stagehand. And they'd come out, and then there'd be a little comedy, and then the comedy would always end with Ted Healy taking the guy and slapping him in the face hard enough and loud enough that it could be heard in the last row of the last balcony. This was real violence, and it was known as a roughhouse act. So that's how Moe and Shemp got started in show business. Later, Larry Fine joined the team. It was Moe, Larry, and Shemp. They still weren't called a team. They were still just various stooges. And in this, Shemp was the star. Shemp was taller. He was, believe it or not, good looking. He had his name in the same typeface as Ted Healy in many of the advertisements. Shemp was, you know, Moe has always set himself up as the leader of the gang because that's what he was on screen and sort of behind the scenes. But at the beginning, Shemp was the star. Go back to the history of it. As Moe says, Shemp ends up quitting the act in 1932 because he's afraid of Ted Healy. He's this phobic, scaredy cat, bedwetter. Poor Shemp. No, that's not at all. You go, I dug into the history of it. Shemp quit the act because he wanted more money. They're heading to Broadway again. And Shemp said, hey, you know what? I'm like the second banana here to Ted Healy. I deserve more money. And Ted Healy said, well, look, I paid the three of you a certain amount of money. You want more money? Change the split with your brother and Larry Fine. When they said no, Shemp took off for the Wild Blue Yonder solo. And he went on to have a 12-year career in pictures as a solo comic character actor, very successful until about 1946, when his younger brother Curly, who had replaced him on the team, got very sick, had a stroke, couldn't continue, and he agreed to rejoin the act to keep his brother Moe working so the Three Stooges wouldn't just end. And he didn't get much thanks for it in history.
You know, from Moe's interpretation, you know, he was everything. I actually picked up that book one time in a bookstore, thumbed my way through it a little bit, and I saw how it was all about Moe. Now, Larry Fine was always there throughout, yes?
He was there from about 1927. If you read Moe's book, Moe will never forget the day in 1927 when he and Ted Healy were in between shows. They were at a nightclub in Chicago.
Mm.
And there's this little guy up on stage sawing away on his violin, and he's got the frizzy hair.
Yep.
And Moe turned to Ted Healy. This is with Moe's book, and this has been repeated. And Moe said, "Do you think what I'm thinking? We gotta hire this guy. This guy's great." And they hired Larry.
It was kind of an unsung
Not
position.
true. Oh, wait, that's not true. It's not,
No.
not true. Okay. Moe wasn't on the team. He had quit the team for 3 years to sell real estate with his mother back in Brooklyn. It was Shemp who was there with Ted Healy. You know, Moe leaves out the fact that during these wonder years, during these formative years before they got into pictures, Moe quit. He went back to Brooklyn. Shemp, on his own, conquered Broadway, vaudeville, toured the country, all around the country with Ted Healy. And so that's the sort of thing where, you know, Shemp was the star of the show, and history has denied him that.
How were the Three Stooges received during the time they were actually creating these films, when you would go to the picture show and see these films? You know, what was the audience?
Well, the audience for their film shorts,
Yeah.
were, if you were going to a James Cagney film, they put on a bunch of shorts, they put on a newsreel, and they might throw on a Three Stooges short. So you're just watching that. It was just, you know, it wasn't for kids. It wasn't for kids like it was in the 1960s. It was for a general audience. And so yeah, sometimes there were Cagney films, sometimes it was a musical, sometimes it was a Marlene Dietrich film. They would just throw on these short 15-minute, 18-minute shorts before the major picture began. Nobody was going to the pictures to just see the Three Stooges. They weren't, you know, playing solo. Although they often, and through their entire career, were on the road and they do stage shows. So they might show up on stage before a Cagney film, let's say, as part of a bigger show, because they were combining movies and live entertainment at the time vaudeville was being replaced by motion pictures.
In syndication, they were huge. And
Yeah.
that's the 60s when it started.
Yeah, well, very interesting. And this is another problem that Shemp has. In right about 1959, early 60s, Screen Gem owned all the Three Stooges film shorts, and they go back to the 1930s. So they had a big package of them. Let's say they had, you know, 25 or 50. They start a show on PAX with Officer Joe Bolton all around the country. They start showing these Three Stooges flicks. The kids go wild. Who is this guy, Curly? Who? He's like one of us. He's this, you know, rotund guy who looks like a baby. He spins around on the floor. He makes noises. He's so crazy. And he was like our Belushi or, you know, Chris Farley. You know, he was this, you know, large person who was like a, you know, very balletic, could dance, could do everything. So anyway, they become very successful. They put out a second batch of film, more Mo, Larry, and Curly. Then around the third batch that Screen Gem releases, they throw in Shemp. And so you're sitting there, come home from school, and you see Mo, Larry, and who's this ugly guy? Who's this guy Shemp? Where's Curly? And
Yeah.
they didn't make any announcements. You know, it's like, we want Curly. And so he had no chance with the kids because suddenly there's this ugly man, you know, in your living room instead of the cherubic Curly. And so again, that's why Shemp had no chance. He was dead by the time. So was Curly. There was a new final version of the Three Stooges at that time, which Mo cashed in on. Mo, Larry, and Joe DeRita started making pictures like Snow White and the Three Stooges and the Three Stooges in Orbit. I remember seeing those in matinees when I was a kid, and so they had suddenly had a new audience. And at the same time, I just saw recently on YouTube there was an interview that the three of them did, where the interviewer said, "You guys are really popular on television now, and a lot of mothers are complaining about this violence." And Mo said, no, we understand now. We have a very young audience. You know, we fake it. You know, if I'm going to pull Larry's nose, see, it's fake. Or if I'm going to poke him in the eye, I actually poke him in the forehead." And that really wasn't true and the way things worked. Maybe on screen, when they made their film shorts, they were able to use sound effects. But they didn't have sound effects when they appeared in person. And they appeared in person from the 30s on through the 1960s. And when they were on stage, the slaps and the punches, hits were for real.
And here's something I learned in just preparing for this. I think Curly died of a brain situation. Larry the same, and somebody the other Shemp. How did Shemp die?
Shemp, who supposedly was afraid of the world, afraid of everything, had been to his favorite sport, a boxing match. He would sit ringside in LA at the boxing arena, and when the fighters would fight, Shemp would imitate them, and the crowd could see him and laugh, and then the cornermen would come down and wave the towels on him, and he would also, when he got to the fights, he would hand out newspapers to his friends, and his friends would say, "What are we going to read the newspaper?" He goes, "No. That's when the blood starts flying. You got to cover yourself like you're at a Gallagher show, when a watermelon starts." And so he wasn't afraid of that. He was with two of his pals. They got in a cab after the fight. They're heading home over the Cahuenga Pass to the valley where he lived. And he's telling a joke and smoking a cigar. And suddenly he stops talking. And his pal says, "Hey, Shemp, you're burning my suit." He had died. The death certificate says that it was a heart attack, but his family, including his daughter-in-law, who's still alive today, she's in her 90s, they said no, she remembers she was there. It was a brain hemorrhage. It was a hemorrhage, just as Curly, who had many strokes. When one of the first times he was one of the first times he was really diagnosed and given a big checkup at a hospital in Santa Barbara, they found among his other ailments from drinking and obesity that he had hemorrhaging in his eyeballs, which comes from hits to the head.
Yeah.
Larry had calluses all over the left side of his face, which some would say, no, that was from playing the violin, but he says, no, that was from all the slaps he took in the head. Mo is the one who said, I was a smart one. I took Ted Healy's place. I gave the hits. And Mo's the only one. He died of cancer at 77. But Curly, Shemp, and Larry all basically died from brain hemorrhages.
I saw Mo on Dick Cavett. You can see it on YouTube, folks.
Yeah.
Mo's just sitting there, very different than you remember him, speaking in such a way where it's a very sophisticated way. And it's kind of, you're taken aback by how intelligent he comes off. But it was the biggest thing going in school for so many people. They were so very into it, all my friends. And I remember them having Curly as the favorite, always. Always Curly, they preferred Curly. And that was a big thing. We'd say, well, who do you like? Do you like Curly, Shemp, Joe Besser? I don't think anybody knew by name, really.
Yeah.
But the other guy was an Italian guy. What was his name?
Curly Joe DeRita. They call him Curly
right.
Joe DeRita.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, so everybody was just in love with Curly. When Curly left the scene, was Shemp able to take over the mantle and actually do something with it? And I don't know if it was ratings, but the people were still coming to see Shemp as the third Stooge?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. When they split up in 1932, the Three Stooges, Mo had Curly waiting in the wings when Shemp quit, no matter what story that Mo tells. So Curly joins the group. They go off and they become the Three Stooges, basically. They get a contract at Columbia and they start making Three Stooges shorts. Shemp went off on his own and he became a solo star, first making comedy shorts and then appearing in movies. He was in movies with W.C. Fields. He was in 5 Abbott Costello pictures. He was in one of the Thin Man movies. He was in a Charlie Chan movie. He made a movie with John Wayne, Randolph Scott, and Marlene Dietrich, as well as his own solo shorts. So he had a pretty good career as a comic actor, a guy that could fit into any film. Some films, he made two films with the Bowery Boys before they became officially the Bowery Boys. I think they were still the East Side Kids.
Yep.
And he was, in some films, he'd be throughout the whole film. In some films, he'd do a couple of scenes, a little cameo or whatever, but he'd always fit in. So when Curly had this final debilitating stroke, he happened to be working at Columbia as well, doing solo stuff. And Mo convinced him somehow to give up his solo career to rejoin the team. And he had it in writing. I have the contract in the book where it's going to be temporary. This is only going to be temporary until Curly gets better. Curly didn't get better. The first few things that Shemp was in were sort of like, they treated him like a guest star. They gave him a lot of solo space, let him do stuff before he kind of fell into the swing of things. You talk about whether people, accepted him and whether he managed to keep everything going. By this time, the quality and the demand for these shorts was fading. They were putting double features of pictures in theaters now instead of these shorts. Columbia wasn't spending a lot of money, where they used to spend 5 whole days shooting a short. Now they might spend 2 or even 1 day, because they were taking the old shorts from the 30s, using footage from that, mixing it in, cutting a couple of extra scenes, and Shemp found himself doing scripts that were remakes of old Curly shorts, and maybe working a day or 2 or 1 day on a short. But the Three Stooges kept going. When Shemp died in 1955, the Stooges still owed Columbia 4 more shorts. And Harry Cohn, the boss of Columbia, said, you still got to make these shorts, So Shemp made 4 movies after he died. They took some older things that Shemp had done, remade them, and brought in one of the supporting players, a guy named Joe Palma, to be the fake Shemp. He would you'd see his back. He had a wig on, so he looked a little bit like Shemp. He made some gestures, and he actually made some noises to sound like Shemp, and those are known as the fake Shemps. And today in Hollywood, you might know that whenever uh, an actor comes in and fills in for a star for that kind of shot, he's known as the fake Shemp. That's a Hollywood term now.
I never heard that term.
Yeah.
That's interesting. How about his personal life?
Personal life, he was a real family man. And that's the thing with the Stooges, you know. I think Shemp had been married 30 years. Uh, Mo also had a long marriage. Only Curly was one who had 4 wives and was out drinking and partying and loved the women, etc. But he lived a very, quiet family life. He had a son who he doted on. When his son's wife had a baby, he went and rented out his house and bought an apartment building nearby so that they could be in the next unit, so he'd be closer to his kid and his grandchild. And he liked the horses. He liked going to the racetrack. He liked going to the fights. He didn't get any of these stories about Shemp, any of these like scandalous stories of him on the road in these hotels with all these showgirls. You never heard any of these, about the mob being after him for gambling debts. Never heard anything about that with Shemp. He was just a real hard worker and a real mensch, as they say. He really, he had a good bunch of friends, and he really cared about his family. That was the thing. Even when he was competing with the Three Stooges on screen, and even when, however Mo was treating him, it was all family to him.
When was the height of their popularity?
Well, probably the height was probably around, in the late 30s, early 1940s. That's when Curly really hit his stride. They were the first. They had a film called You Nasty Spy, which was a parody of Adolf Hitler right before World War II started. And at the same time, Charlie Chaplin was making, I think it was called the Dictator. Charlie
Yes.
Chaplin was making his film, but it was taking Chaplin longer to make it. So the Three Stooges came out first, and they were the first to actually, do a really good parody of what Hitler was doing in Europe. And by that time, I think that was their real peak. Right around the time they reached their peak, as always happens, it always seems to happen, Curly started to slide. That's when he started having a couple of mini strokes. Then he had another stroke. One of the reasons, or one of the byproducts of his poor health, was that whenever they weren't working, whenever they weren't working on the Columbia lot making these shorts, Mo had them on the road. I mean, he was like their business manager. He had it signed on his he had Larry and Curly sign a deal at one point where, he was the boss. If any of them wanted to quit, they had to pay Mo money. It was a very lopsided contract there. Apparently, he never asked for a raise from Columbia, no matter what they did. But he kept them on the road constantly, and that was part of it. So they go from working, then they'd be on a tour. They'd be on the East Coast, and he'd be slapping everybody silly on stage, and then next thing you know, they're on the West Coast doing it in San Francisco, and then they come back and they would be back on the set. So that's really how they made a lot of their money. At one point when Curly was really sliding, this was in early 1945, he collapsed on the road, and they had to stop. They sent him to the hospital back in California, and Mo somehow convinced Shemp, who by this time was doing very well on his own, to come down to New Orleans and take Curly's place on stage, just like the old days. And he did it for some reason. I don't know how Mo guilted him into doing it, but he did it. And the local paper, they had a publicity photo of Mo, Larry, and Curly. They took a picture of Shemp's head and just pasted it on Curly's body, right? So people showed up, and they had the same reaction the kids did. They said, "Where's Curly? He was a star of the show. Who's this guy Shemp?" They had to cancel the tour, and that was the end of that tour. But once Shemp joined the Stooges, again, they were on the road right up until Shemp's death.
Did they make really big money, Burt? And did they keep their money? And more importantly, let's talk about Shemp. That's the subject. Was he well-to-do when he passed away?
They were sort of middle of the road. Middle of the road for Hollywood. They lived in an area called Toluca Lake,
Hmm.
which is, if anybody's been to Universal theme park, it's up near there. It looks like a little Mayberry. It's a little small town tucked away on the edge of the valley there. But again, there's some very huge estates there. That's where Bob Hope lived, and I think Bing Crosby lived there. He had a very nice house. No, he was doing pretty well for himself there. Mo also lived in the neighborhood, and so he was able to live, a good life. No, they weren't, living in apartments with a hot plate like some of these people wind up doing
Happens.
in Hollywood. But he did very very well for himself.
And the two brothers later on, did they see eye to eye, or were they always clashing?
There's no word that they had any major clashes, he and Mo. I mean, again, I think it goes back to their childhood, where they came from. They were children of Lithuanian Jewish immigrants, from Brooklyn, always out to work. Their mother was a real go-getter. She was became a big real estate broker in Brooklyn even before she could really speak English. And I think they always wanted to work. I think Shemp was just happy to get out there and work. They had that, they were vaudevillians, like the show must go on, and they'd pack up their trunk and just hit the road. So no, it seemed that they all got along to the very end.
And what was the surprising thing that you came upon, if any, when you wrote this book? Anything that really surprised you about the Stooges?
Well, aside from the fact that, I was surprised that a lot of the history is wrong, that made the whole thing a lot more interesting, because what started as a simple biography project really turned into this, excavation. I mean, you read Mo's book, just to go back, and his big deal was that Shemp was his bedwetter, right? And Shemp in 1918 was inducted into the U.S. Army during World War One. It was part of the October replacement draft, when they were getting more people to replace all the people that were being killed, in all the men that were being killed in Europe. Uh, he went to basic training in the Carolinas, and a couple of months later, the armistice was signed. And the armistice ended the war, and they sent people home. You read Mo's book, and they say Shemp was in the army, but he was discharged because he was a bedwetter. And if he was in the Navy, they might not have noticed. Ha ha. And I'm reading this. I'm like, who would write this about their older brother, their beloved brother who's gone? Who would write that? Because say he was a bedwetter. And then I look into it, and I got his discharge papers. No, he was sent home because the war was over. They sent everyone home. There was no record of any sort of bedwetting thing. But that was those sort of things, and that went on, and those sort of things, those little digs. Oh, Shemp quit the act because he was afraid of Ted Healy. No, that wasn't true. I found the documentation to prove otherwise. The other thing that I discovered was how funny Shemp was. Again, I'm not. I used to love the Three Stooges. I see the Three Stooges, and I haven't seen their stuff, a lot of it, since I was a kid. And I haven't seen a lot of films that Shemp was in as a solo performer. And some of his stuff is really, really funny. I mean, and you can find this stuff on YouTube and online. There's a film called Hollywood Roundup. This is, I think, one of the first pictures he made when he came out here to Hollywood. You into acting and into the business would love this, because it's like one of those, what's that movie, Hail Caesar, that George Clooney was in, the Coen Brothers movie.
Oh,
And
yeah.
these movies that like parody Hollywood. It's about the making of a Western, and Shemp is the assistant director with the megaphone screaming at everybody, and he's hilarious in it. He's not the star of the film, but he's one of the co-stars, and he's into the whole thing, and it's one of the greatest Hollywood parodies I've seen. And then you can watch the Abbott and Costello pictures. Buck Privates was the first one that got Abbott and Costello really famous during the build-up to World War II. They became so famous that Universal couldn't make Abbott and Costello pictures fast enough. So they started making Abbott and Costello pictures without Abbott and Costello. And one of them was called San Antonio Rose. And they hook up Shemp with Lon Chaney Jr. as like the Abbott Costello team. And this is worth watching, because Lon Chaney Jr. remember the Wolfman, is
Yep.
not funny. He's not funny at all in this. And in fact, he's slapping and pushing and shoving Shemp through the whole thing. And it's when you watch this, it's like brutally like this is worse than anything Mo ever did or anything Ted Healy did. The next one they made was called Private Buckaroo instead of Buck Privates. And the Andrews sisters are in it, just like they were in the Abbott and Costello
Yep.
pictures. And Shemp is really the star of this one. And he pulls out all the stops. His protege, Hunt Saul, is in it as well. But if you want to see a movie like a full-length movie starring Shemp, you got to check out Private Buckaroo. It's really good. It's really funny, and it shows that Shemp, had this charisma, and he was a great comic actor. So I was surprised all along the way every time I watched another Shemp picture.
When you go and start a project, what's the first thing that you have to attend to? What does the process look like when you decide in your mind Shemp is going to be my next subject? What do you do? Well, what's the first thing? Do you dig up old? Do you go to sources, human beings, or do you go to the archives?
First thing I do is figure what's the main, what's the core of this book? What story am I telling here? With Brando, the Brando book, it was like, again, there's been so much written about Brando. What's new to write about Marlon Brando? What can I add to this huge library that's already out there? Well, we came up with the idea of, it's been 100 years since his birth, 20 since his death. Let's look at the impact that he's had on culture and continues to have today. So that got me going there. With Shemp, it was like, okay, here's this, forgotten member of the Three Stooges, the one that, nobody at the time had written about yet. I start with the source material, went to Mo's book, went to the books that are out there, started gathering up all the information. Then I started lining up the sources and people who knew Shemp, who knew the family, people who are biographers, experts on Columbia Pictures, experts on Abbott and Costello, experts, and start digging those up. And then through the research, then the story starts to come together in my head, which was basically, here's a story that you think you knew, if you even bother to know it. But guess what? It's not true. This is for the first time you're going to cut through everything and see hear the real story of the Three Stooges. This is really going to rewrite Three Stooges history. I mean, Mo's son did like a 7-part documentary series, really long, maybe longer than that. You could find that on YouTube, called Hey Dad, Hey Mo. And I think it was probably about 20 or 30 years old now. And a lot of the people who are experts today are in this documentary. And I'm watching it, and it's the same story. It's all the wrong stuff. It's the same story. They've all gone back to Mo's story. You mentioned you saw him on Dick Cavett. He used to show up on the Mike Douglas show, and he used to show up on the radio. And it's all there on YouTube, and it's all there online. And he tells these stories that aren't true.
Mm.
And everybody went along with it because it's all part of this, Stooges history. There's already a bit of a controversy among the Three Stooges fans. I can see by looking at the threestooges.net fan forums. They discuss things, and some of them are like, well, I agree that they could have been hurt by those slaps, but people didn't know what CTE was back then, so I can't blame Mo for that. Mo wouldn't know anything about that. It's like, oh really? I mean, they work with Slapsy Maxie Rosenblum. They know about what being punch drunk was. They know how you get punch drunk. Same sort of thing. But anyway, I'm not going to argue with them. It's like, let them read it and decide.
Yeah, you had the last say, that's for sure. And that's, if you don't know, folks, that's what football players after a long career, they're senile by the time they're 50. They don't know who they are. Boy, it's one blow to the head is enough, but 20 and 40 is way more than the human being can stand. I've gotten my share. I've had about 5-6 concussions playing every sport known to man, Burt. And I don't see the effects, but you never know. I could still discover some things down the road. But man, the head is so, the violence, it would never fly these days. Not in the comic sense. You can go and shoot 20 people in a film, blood all over the place, but you can't knock somebody around and laugh at it these days.
Yeah. I mean, somebody asked me, who are the who are the successors to the Stooges? Is there anybody out there doing what the Stooges did? And I said, yeah, there is. The WWE.
Yeah, true.
It's very much like that. In fact, in the book, I quote a writer who had written about Shemp, and he compared the WWE and pro wrestling and the Stooges in the violence and the comedy, and said that Shemp was the ultimate jobber. And I guess the jobber is the wrestler who agrees to go in and lose so that makes the other guy look better. And he said that's what Shemp did for Mo. That's what he did for his brother and for the Three Stooges. He's the ultimate jobber.
He took the fall. He took the fall over and over again. And I was fascinated by Larry, the middle. It's like a middle child, doesn't get as much attention, but I like the I guess the compatibility of the three. But when Shemp was there and Larry was there and Mo was there, I thought it was very cohesive. I saw a few flicks with those three. I thought they were fantastic, but Larry had a difficult job. I know you didn't delve into Larry too much, but he had a difficult job because he was the unsung hero to a certain extent, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was like, they called him, the middleman, but he was sort of like the everyman. He was, he was sort of the guy on the side. He was always part of it, always willing to take a hit from Mo, and he had his own thing going. Yeah, and I think they really came together with Shemp because, again, Shemp was a really fine actor as well as just a comedian. He was the only one of the Stooges who could exist as an entertainer without the other Stooges. Mo, Larry, and Curly were Stooges. Even Mo made a couple of solo appearances later in life. He still was Mo. And Larry was the same thing. Shemp was the only one who was really versatile enough, really able to go out and he could do. He did dramatic roles. One thing people should find, as a matter of fact, it's on the Shemp book website that we have for the book. It's a dramatic role Shemp did in the 1930s. It's a movie called Convention Girl, and it's based in Atlantic City. And somehow this is one of these movies that got past the Hays Code censors. It's basically about a woman who runs prostitutes for businessmen in Atlantic City, like cocktail girls, whatever they call them in the movie. Shemp plays a thug. He plays a mobster, and in it, he's Shemp. So you see him, you might laugh originally, but he's actually pretty tough in the movie. And at one point, he pulls off a blackmail scheme. And when his partner demands his share of the money, Shemp shoots him and kills him. And I'm watching this and I'm saying, this is Joe Pesci in Goodfellas.
Yeah.
He's the funny guy. And it's like, what am I, funny? And all of a sudden he becomes really scary. And it's like, you wish that you saw more of that, because although we think of Shemp as, again, the scaredy cat, the frightened, timid person that he was in the Three Stooges films, he never played that role before the Three Stooges. He had this bag of tricks, and one of them was playing the comic gangster. And he did several films that were, comedy dramas where he played, played a kidnapper. He played some scary roles, and you kind of wish you saw more of that. I mean, I always say I would have loved to have seen him in Guys and Dolls, because he was in several Damon Runyon pictures, including one with Abbott and Costello. So he was very, very versatile. And I think that, as a matter of fact, coming up next month, we're doing a couple of appearances with my friend Ray Richmond, who is a entertainment writer and critic. He's got a book coming out in the middle of October called The Sopranos: The Pictorial History. Beautiful coffee table book about The Sopranos. And we are going to do some discussions about the connection and the influence of the Three Stooges and Shemp Howard on The Sopranos. Interesting enough,
you never would think that,
but David Chase, the creator of The Sopranos, has pointed it out.
Really?
Yeah, he said, if you remember, you'd watch The Sopranos and you'd laugh. They do funny stuff, and even when there's like some hit or murder going on, you got one scene where I don't remember if it was Joey Pants who hit somebody over the head with a frying pan before he is chasing around the kitchen. And David Chase said, I have to admit, I'm a Laurel and Hardy guy. But Terrence Winter, who was another executive producer, a director, and wrote many of The Sopranos, he said, Terrence Winter is a Three Stooges guy. And a lot of the stuff he did, a lot of the violence is directly influenced by the Three Stooges. Do you remember the episode where Christopher and Silvio?
Believe it or not, I wasn't a real Sopranos guy.
Ah, all right.
I hate to admit that being Italian on the East Coast, but
Yeah.
not really. And you know,
But
I
anyway,
was asked, I was actually was going to read for something one time, and I had another project going, and I actually turned it down. My wife to this day scolds me on it. Are you crazy? That's what happened to me. That was maybe 1999 or 2000.
anyway.
Yeah. But but I want to know if something we did not cover, anything, and first of all, hold that book up one more time because I want to see, if you would, I want to see that cover. Here it comes,
There
slow
he is.
but surely. Look at that mug, as you said. Look at that mug. That is a great shot of him, though.
Yeah, that's the face.
That's Burt Kearns. That's Shemp. And you can't buy that book fast enough. And go to Amazon to get that thing. I think that's the way people buy books, right? No more bookstores, or very few anyway.
Yeah, we try to support those local, those independent bookstores as we can. There's still a few out there. We try to support them.
And
And
talk again about this event coming up. What should we know about that?
well, that's gonna be coming up in November. It's at Book Soup on the Sunset Strip. It's going to be Thanksgiving weekend, which is a big sales weekend. Apparently, it's going to be on that Saturday. We might have a couple before then. Still getting things together, believe it or not.
How long have you been writing?
Have I been writing?
Have you writing books?
Well, I wrote my first book that was published was in 1999. I'd written in 1996. It was called Tabloid Baby, and it was basically my memoir and my apology for my years in tabloid television, in which I sort of talked about all the crimes that we committed to get certain stories on the air back in the heyday of tabloid TV. And then I took about 20 years off after that. And I've done a lot of work in television and film and documentaries. And then in 2019, we did the book The Show Won't Go On, about performers who died on stage. And then after that, things loosened up for me schedule-wise. And during the pandemic, my pandemic project was a book on Lawrence Tierney, where I just sat at the kitchen table and just did a lot of research, and suddenly found that I had a book here and did a lot of interviews, and then got that book sold. And then came Brando and Shemp. They're all roads led to Shemp.
TV?
Pardon me?
Do you miss TV?
Well, I still work with TV.
You do?
I still do go back and forth. But right now I'm editing and producing a documentary with Legs McNeil. People might remember from the days of Punk magazine. Legs wrote the book called Please Kill Me, the illustrated history, the oral history of punk, which has been around for like almost 30 years now, still selling everywhere. Doing a documentary on Frank Lucas. And Frank Lucas is the person that Denzel Washington portrayed in the film American Gangster. He was a drug dealer in Harlem back in the 1960s and 70s. So I'm working on a documentary on that, and still always trying to sell television series. It's been a bit tougher the last few years.
Is it all streaming, all Netflix, all those type of things?
All that, yeah.
Yeah.
I had a show on last year on We TV.
We TV, I know.
Breaking the Ice. We had a series about an African American synchronized ice skating team from Washington, D.C. We did a season of that. So I'm always bouncing back and forth wherever the work is.
It's esoteric topics that you choose.
Yeah,
it's right down my alley, because I get really into these type of things. Not the ordinary thing you see every day. You can get it anywhere. You choose some very obscure stuff, but interesting stuff.
That's the thing. That's been a problem. I don't want to say a problem, but it's been an issue. Like, again, where my book agent would say, you've got to start doing projects on people that people have heard of. I did a documentary on Chris Montez. And if you remember Chris Montez.
Yes. The More I See You.
Yeah, but first he did Let's Dance.
Right.
And that was the song that is played during the food fight an Animal House, right?
Mm.
So, you know, I'd heard The More I See You on the radio in my car back in radio days. And I hear the song and I say, I know that chick. Who is that woman singing that? And I look it up, you know, and it's Chris Montez. It's a man. And I went, oh, right. So I started looking up his story. And it's find out Chris Montez is like one of 12 children. He's a Mexican American brought up in Hawthorne, California. Went to school. His hero was Richie Valens. He meets Richie Valens at a show when he's in high school. His high school classmate, Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
Chris and Brian go to school. Chris is in the living room of the Beach Boys house all the time, jamming and playing during high school. Then after his rock and roll career is basically over, he's still famous in England. So he and Tommy Rowe get a gig to go over and perform a tour in England. And he's the headliner of the tour. And the opening act, the Beatles. And so halfway through the tour, this is 63, midway through the tour, the Beatles' first album comes out and Beatlemania hits England. So now Chris is the opening act and the Beatles are headlining the rest of the tour. And then Chris quits the business, gets rediscovered by Herb Alpert, and winds up doing The More I See You and songs like that. So I heard that and I said to my partner at the time, we got to do it. This is a great story. So like a few days later, we're sitting with Chris Montez and his manager, you know, in his office and say, let's do a documentary, man. And he's, you know,
I'm glad he's still around.
He's still, I believe Chris is about 80 years old now, and he's still out there doing it. And he's
really
greatest guy, full of energy, a wonderful guy. Everybody loves Chris, as they say.
I just saw Frankie Valli, 90 years old, 91, something like that.
Some sad stuff on the internet.
He was lip syncing on stage.
Well, he wasn't opening his mouth. I think it would help more if he opened his mouth.
He was really kind of, I don't know. The guy's 91, whatever he is. Well, Burt, you know, another winner you got on your hands.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah,
your birthday show. Your birthday show was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, I had all those great news. We had you had to see the studio is as small as a phone booth. Everybody jammed in that studio. It was a fire hazard, but we had fun.
Yeah, it was worth it. It was cool.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Burt. And we'll put this on the radio next. We'll put this on the YouTube channel, but we'll put it on the radio on WPAT next week. You know, I'll let you know what's going on.
Terrific. Keep in touch. Thanks so much, Ralph.
Same here. Bye.
Bye.